Hi, and thanks for joining me for this video lesson. Our learning outcomes today are to develop an understanding of ICT manufacturing and access throughout the world. And the skills that you'll be using will be reading, listening, using your laptops, and completing some analysis of information. Now let's begin. This is a short reading that comes from the Oxford Big Ideas 9 textbook. Hidden inside many of the items that you use every day are bits and pieces from all around the world. A modern laptop computer, for example, contains materials and components from at least 20 different countries located on every continent except Antarctica. A complex series of networks and supply chains produce these components, transport them, process and assemble them, then package and deliver the finished laptop to a store near you. Take a look at the world map on your right. You'll see that almost every country has some kind of contribution to make to providing materials used in creating laptops, just like yours. Take a look at this resource on your left. You'll see that it is a table that shows countries of origin and the materials supplied for laptop construction. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of things on this list are things I've never even heard of, but clearly they're an important component of our laptop computers. What I'd like you to do is examine this table very carefully, and then I want you to reorganise it. Take this information and create a table that identifies which continents supply which materials to create laptop computers. It should take about 7 minutes, so pause the video, switch your screen, do this on your laptop and create a table. An example is below. Good luck! Now let's take a look at the Australian contribution to every laptop. Australia is one of the most mineral-rich countries in the world. All laptop computers, for example, contain zinc, lead, gold and titanium, and Australia is one of the world leaders in the mining of all these materials. The rocks near the town of Mount Isa, for example, contain some of the richest deposits of lead and zinc found on Earth. Settled in the 1920s, the town is now home to over 22,000 people, virtually all of whom rely on the town's mines for their employment and income. Lead is mined and processed near the town. Lead ore is crushed and heated until it becomes a liquid, so impurities can be removed in a process known as smelting. This process releases harmful gases and lead particles into the air. Recently, some concerns have been raised that this is creating health risks for Mount Isa residents, particularly the children. A study in 2008 found that 11% of children tested had higher than normal lead levels in their blood. Now it's time for more action. What I'd like you to do is examine these two images carefully and then explain the connection that exists between them. The one on the left, source 1, shows virtually all the world's laptops are assembled in Chinese factories owned by Taiwanese companies. And in 2015, 286 million laptops were made in China. The source on the right is the lead mine at Mount Isa in northwest Queensland. It's one of the most productive in the world and is the one I just spoke about in the previous slide. The digital divide. During your lifetime, the internet and other digital technologies have become the most powerful tools of connection the world has ever known. As a result, many experts argue that we are currently experiencing a digital revolution. In many places, it now seems easier to be connected to other people and places than not to be. However, this high level of connection is not experienced equally by everyone. In some places, there are more computers and mobile phones than there are people, while in other places, these devices are still uncommon. These differences are known as the digital divide. So let's take a look at digital access in developing nations. Now, developing nations are countries that are still trying to get some aspects of their infrastructure together. So they're called the developing world. To counter that, we also have something called the developed world, and that is something that Australia, the US are a part of. So when we talk about developed, we mean first world countries. And when we say developing, we mean countries that are still on their way to developing those sorts of infrastructures. So let's take a closer look. While access to communication technologies is greatest in developed nations, the rest of the world is beginning to catch up. The people in the sub-Saharan African nation of Niger, for example, are identified in Source 3, which I'll show you in just a minute, as having the least access to ICT. In 2000, only one resident of Niger in every 5,000 people had a mobile phone subscription. By 2013, this had become 1 in every 3. For many people in developing countries, the internet and mobile phone have become a way to access the promise of a better future for themselves and their children. This promise grew following large-scale protests against governments in many Middle Eastern and North African countries that began in 2010 and resulted in the overthrow of several governments. Known as the Arab Spring, it showed the power of social media, as people used sites such as Facebook and Twitter to organise protests and broadcast acts of violence by the police and armed forces. Let's take a careful look at these two resources. The source at the top is a table and shows us data from the International Telecommunications Union, which is part of the United Nations, and shows the developing rates of mobile and internet use in developed and developing nations as a percentage of the population. So to give you an example, in 2013, 128.2% of people in the developed world had a mobile phone subscription, as opposed to 89.4% of people in the developing world at that time. Let's take a look at something else. In 2005, 44.7% of homes in the developed world had internet. In contrast, in the developing world, 8.1% of homes had access to the internet. Take a look at the world map below. This shows the levels of digital access, and how they got this information was they ranked all the countries in terms of their digital access, and the lighter countries are those that have really easy access to digital equipment, and those that are darker have very little. As you can see, Australia is very easily in the top 10. Time for more action from you. What I'd like you to do is take some of the information on this table and create a graph to show the growth of one area in comparison between the developed and the developing countries. Once you have created this graph, I'd like you to write a PQE paragraph about this. Remember, all of this is contributing to your portfolio, so it's worth doing your very best effort. If you have the chance, go back over the work you've completed in this session and make sure that it is complete and thorough. And remember looking at the assessment rubric to make sure that it really is where you're accurately sitting at the moment in terms of your skills. So that brings us to the end. If you've managed to complete all these activities in one lesson, then you have done a fantastic job. Just one more thing, I'd like to give full credit to the textbook where I sourced all of this information. The information contained in this presentation was from Oxford Big Ideas 9, which was written by Easton and others, published by Oxford in South Melbourne in 2016. Thanks very much for your time. I'll see you in class.